The fire burns low in the hearth tonight. Beyond the window, frost gathers on the glass, thick and white, catching the last light of a winter afternoon. The year is ending, the nights have grown long, and the cold presses close against the stone walls of this old house. But inside there is warmth, there is stillness, there is the quiet expectation that comes only at this particular threshold, when 1 year fades and another waits, unseen, just beyond the door. Tonight we gather here, you and I, to journey into the Scotland of old, not the Scotland of cities and commerce, but the Scotland of croft and clachan, of peat smoke and candle flame, of customs handed down through generations, like heirlooms too precious to be forgotten. Tonight we speak of Hogmanay. Outside, the world sleeps beneath winter's blanket. The hills are dark, the lochs lie still and silent, reflecting nothing but the cold stars overhead. And in this stillness, in this pause between the dying of the old year and the birth of the new, there is magic, there is memory, there is the sense that something ancient stirs, waiting. So settle yourself by the fire, let the flames flicker and dance, let the shadows gather in the corners of the room, and let us begin. Hogmanay, the word itself carries a kind of music, a rhythm that feels both familiar and strange. To those outside Scotland, it may sound foreign, exotic even, but to the Scots it is as natural as breathing. Hogmanay is New Year's Eve, the 31st of December, the final night of the year, but it is also far more than that. For centuries, Hogmanay has been Scotland's great midwinter festival, more important than Christmas, more anticipated, more deeply woven into the fabric of Scottish life, where other nations might gather around Christmas trees and sing carols. The Scots have always turned their attention to the turning of the year itself, to the moment when time folds over, when the darkness reaches its deepest point and begins slowly to retreat. The reasons for this are rooted deep in Scotland's history. In the 16th century, when the Protestant Reformation swept across the land, Christmas fell out of favour. The Kirk, strict and uncompromising, saw Christmas as a papist festival, too Catholic, too indulgent. In 1640, Scotland officially banned the celebration of Christmas. For over 300 years, Christmas Day was simply another working day. Shops opened, people laboured, there were no feasts, no decorations, no days of rest. It was not until 1958 that Christmas became a public holiday in Scotland, and even then, it took years before it truly took hold in the hearts of the people. By that time, Hogmanay had long since claimed its place as the true celebration of the season. And so, while much of the world turned its attention to the 25th of December, Scotland kept its gaze fixed on the 31st. New Year became the time for feasting, for gift-giving, for gathering with family and neighbours. It became the time when doors were flung open to strangers, when fires blazed in the streets, when the past was honoured and the future welcomed with open arms. Hogmanay was, and remains, a celebration of hospitality, of generosity, of the belief that how you greet the new year will shape the year to come. It is a time when neighbours become family, when strangers become friends, when the boundaries between households dissolve and the entire community becomes one. The Scots have a phrase for it: "Lang may your lum reek, long may your chimney smoke." It is a wish for warmth, for prosperity, for life continuing through the dark months ahead. And it is the spirit of Hogmanay distilled into a single sentence. The origins of Hogmanay, like so many old customs, are tangled. Scholars have debated the etymology of the word itself for centuries, and still there is no consensus. Some say it comes from the French word Hogmanay, meaning a gift given at New Year. This theory suggests that the word arrived in Scotland through the Old Alliance, the long friendship between Scotland and France, or perhaps with Mary Queen of Scots when she returned from the French court in 1561. Others look to the Norse, the Vikings, who ruled much of Scotland's northern isles and coastlands for centuries, celebrated Yule with feasting and fire. The Scandinavian word Hogonot meant Yuletide, and in Shetland, where the Norse influence runs deepest, New Year is still called Yules. Then there are those who trace the word to the Anglo-Saxon Halig Monath, Holy Month, or even to the Flemish Hug Mindag, Great Love Day, reflecting the waves of Flemish immigrants who came to Scotland between the 11th and 17th centuries. The truth is, no one knows for certain. The word Hogmanay first appears in written records in 1604, but the customs it describes are far, far older. Look back further still, past the Reformation, past the Vikings, past the arrival of Christianity itself, and you find older celebrations lurking in the winter darkness. The Romans celebrated Saturnalia, a festival of misrule and merriment that ran from the 17th to the 23rd of December. The Celts marked Samhain at the end of October, a time when the veil between worlds grew thin and the dead walked among the living. And long before any of these, ancient peoples gathered around fires at the winter solstice, the darkest day of the year. They lit torches to guide the sun back from its long journey into the south. They burned offerings to ensure that spring would return, that life would triumph over death once more. All of these threads, woven together over millennia, create the fabric of Hogmanay. It is a festival that belongs to no single people, no single faith, no single moment in time. It is instead a gathering of human needs and human hopes. The need for light in the darkness, the need for warmth in the cold, the need to believe that the year ahead will be kinder than the year just past, and above all, the need to mark the turning of the year itself. For the year's end is a liminal time, a threshold. The old year is not quite dead, the new year is not quite born, and in that space between, anything is possible. Fire has always been at the heart of Hogmanay. From the earliest times, when our ancestors huddled in caves against the winter cold, fire has meant survival, light, warmth, protection, the ability to cook food and drive back the beasts that prowled in the darkness. But fire is more than warmth and light. It is symbolic. It is sacred. Fire purifies. Fire transforms. Fire carries prayers to the heavens in columns of smoke. And at the turning of the year, fire becomes a way of burning away the old and welcoming the new. Across Scotland, Hogmanay was marked by fire, not the gentle glow of candles on a table, but roaring bonfires that blazed against the winter sky. Torches carried through the streets, flames that leapt and danced and sent sparks spiralling up into the darkness. In Stonehaven, on the northeast coast, men swung fireballs on long metal poles. These were not small torches. They were massive spheres of wire, packed with rags and soaked in paraffin, set ablaze and whirled overhead in great arcs. The fireball swingers marched through the town in procession, the flames trailing behind them like comets. The tradition has been celebrated for well over a century, and local memory extends it back further still. Though written records grow scarce, the deeper into the past we search, the symbolism seems clear enough. The fire represents the returning sun. The swinging motion purifies the streets, driving out the darkness of the old year and making way for the clean start of the new. To watch the Stonehaven fireballs is to step back in time. The night is cold and black. The sea wind howls in from the harbour, and then the piper begins to play, and the first fireball ignites, and suddenly the darkness is filled with light and heat and the smell of burning tar. The crowd cheers, the swingers move forward, their faces lit by the flames, their breath clouding in the frozen air. And for a moment, you are no longer in the 21st century. You are in a world where fire is magic, where the sun must be coaxed back from the edge of the world, where the turning of the year is a matter of life and death. Further north, in the village of Burghead on the Moray coast, another fire tradition burns, the burning of the Clavie. The exact age of this ceremony is unknown, though scholars have noted connections to several possible sources. The presence of a major Pictish fort at Burghead suggests the site held ceremonial importance long before the Middle Ages. Viking settlement along the Moray coast might have introduced Norse fire customs. Some have even wondered if Roman influence reached this far north, though evidence is scarce. What we can say with certainty is that the ritual feels ancient, reaching back beyond written memory, into a time where fire was humanity's first defence against the dark. What is known is this: every year on the 11th of January, the people of Burghead celebrate Hogmanay according to the old calendar. In 1752, Britain adopted the Gregorian calendar, which moved New Year's Day forward by 11 days. Many communities across Scotland resented this imposed change, seeing it as yet another attempt by church and state to suppress old customs. The people of Burghead found their own solution. They would celebrate twice: New Year on the 1st of January, as the new law required, and Old New Year on the 11th, as memory and tradition demanded. On the night of Old New Year, the Clavie is built. It is a half barrel, once a herring barrel, now usually whisky, filled with wood shavings and tar. A long pole is driven through it, and the whole thing is hoisted onto the shoulders of the Clavie crew, a group of local men chosen for the honour. The barrel is set alight with a smouldering chunk of peat, no matches allowed, and then carried through the streets of the village. The procession follows the same route every year, winding through the narrow lanes, stopping at certain houses to present a burning ember as a gift of good luck. The crew takes turns carrying the Clavie, for it is heavy and the heat is fierce. Sparks fly, smoke billows, the smell of tar and burning wood fills the air. Finally, the Clavie is carried up to the Doory Hill, the site of an ancient Pictish fort. There, on a stone altar built centuries ago, the barrel is set down and more fuel is piled on. The flames leap higher. The hillside glows orange and red against the black winter sky, and when the barrel collapses at last into a pile of blazing embers, the spectators rush forward to collect the coals. These are treasures. They will be taken home to kindle the first fire of the new year, or kept as charms against witchcraft and misfortune. Some are even sent to relatives who have moved away from Burghead, a way of keeping the connection to home alive across the miles. There is something primal about the burning of the Clavie, something that reaches back before Christianity, before even the Picts perhaps. It is a ceremony that speaks to the oldest human fears and hopes, the fear of darkness, the fear of cold, the hope that the light will return, the hope that the community will endure. And it is not only in Stonehaven and Burghead that fire burns at Hogmanay. In Biggar, in the Scottish borders, a bonfire is built in the town centre, growing larger day by day throughout December until it towers over the street. On Hogmanay night, it is lit at 9:30, and the flames rise so high they can be seen for miles around. In Comrie in Perthshire, torches are carried through the village in a procession that ends at the river, where the torches are thrown into the water, a symbolic cleansing. In villages and towns across the Highlands and Islands, smaller fires are kindled on hilltops and in courtyards, each one a beacon against the darkness, each one a prayer for warmth and safety in the year to come. Inside the home, the hearth fire takes on a special significance at Hogmanay. The fire must not be allowed to go out. To let the hearth fire die on New Year's Eve is the worst kind of bad luck, a sign that the household's vitality has failed, and so the fire is tended carefully through the night, kept burning bright until the first light of the new year touches the eastern sky. Fire is protection, fire is hope, fire is memory, and at Hogmanay, fire is the bridge between what was and what will be. Before the bells rang at midnight, before the first footers arrived at the door, before the toasts were made and the songs were sung, there was work to be done, hard, honest, necessary work, the work of redding the house. To red is an old Scots word, meaning to tidy, to clean, to put things in order. And in the days leading up to Hogmanay, every household in Scotland undertook a thorough cleaning. This was not a casual sweep of the floors. This was a deep, almost ritualistic purification of the home. Every room was scrubbed. Every surface was polished. Curtains were taken down and washed. Rugs were beaten until the dust flew in clouds. Windows were cleaned until they gleamed. The house had to be spotless, ready to receive the new year with dignity. The hearth received special attention. The ashes from the old fire were carefully removed and set aside. In some households, these ashes were read, much like tea leaves, to divine the fortunes of the year ahead. Shapes and patterns in the ash could foretell marriage, wealth, travel, or sorrow. Once the reading was done, the ashes were scattered on the fields, carrying the blessing of the hearth fire out into the land. With the hearth cleaned, a new fire was laid, fresh peat or coal, clean kindling, and this fire would be lit on Hogmanay night, a symbol of the new beginning. Some families took great care to ensure that the fire was kindled not with a match, but with a smouldering ember from a neighbour's fire, a way of sharing warmth and luck. But redding the house was not only about physical cleaning. It was about clearing away debts and grievances as well. It was considered deeply unlucky to carry unpaid debts into the new year, and so, in the days before Hogmanay, people settled their accounts. They paid what they owed. They collected what was owed to them. They forgave slights and repaired broken friendships. The idea was simple. Start the new year with a clean slate. No burdens, no grudges, no unfinished business. The past should be honoured, but not allowed to weigh down the future. Some households also practiced a form of spiritual cleansing called seining. This was an old Highland custom, one that blended Christian and pre-Christian elements in equal measure. On New Year's morning, before the sun rose, the lady of the house would rise first. She would draw fresh water from a well or stream, water that had been taken from a place where both the living and the dead had crossed. This was called water from a dead and living ford. She would return home with the water and sprinkle it throughout the house, in every room, on every threshold. The water blessed the home, driving out any lingering spirits or bad influences that might have crept in during the old year. After the water came the smoke. Juniper branches were gathered and set alight. Juniper smoke is thick and pungent, with a sharp, resinous smell. The smoking branches were carried from room to room, filling the house with smoke until people coughed and their eyes watered. Every corner was fumigated, every cupboard, every space where darkness might linger. This was not comfortable. It was not pleasant, but it was necessary. The smoke drove out illness. It drove out misfortune. It purified the air and made the home safe for the year to come. When the seining was complete, all the doors and windows were flung open, no matter how cold the wind outside. The old air, the old year, the old smoke, all of it was swept out into the winter morning, and the house, clean and empty and ready, waited to be filled with the new. It is worth pausing here to consider what redding the house truly meant. On the surface, it was functional. A clean house is a healthier home. Settled debts make for better relationships. These are sensible, pragmatic things. But there was more to it than that. Redding the house was a way of taking control, of asserting agency in a world where so much was beyond human power. You could not control the weather. You could not prevent illness or death. You could not stop the wheel of seasons from turning. But you could clean your house. You could settle your debts. You could make your small corner of the world orderly and safe. And in doing so, you created a foundation on which to build hope. The new year might bring hardship, it might bring sorrow, but you would face it with a clean hearth and a clear conscience, and that, in its own way, was a kind of power. As the clock approached midnight in Hogmanay, anticipation filled the air. The house was clean, the fire burned bright, the food was prepared, and now the waiting began. For in Scotland, the first person to cross the threshold after the stroke of midnight would set the luck for the entire year. This was first footing, one of the oldest and most enduring of all Hogmanay customs. Not just anyone could be a first footer. There were rules, qualifications. The ideal first footer was a tall, dark-haired man. He should be strong and healthy, with a pleasant demeanour. He should not be flat-footed or cross-eyed or red-haired, and he absolutely must not already be inside the house when midnight struck. He had to come from outside, a true visitor, bringing luck from the wider world into the home. Why dark-haired? One explanation, repeated in communities across Scotland, connects this preference to the centuries of Viking raids. Fair-haired strangers arriving at the door had too often meant violence and plunder, the theory suggests. Over generations, the opposite became lucky by contrast. A dark-haired visitor was welcomed as a sign of peaceful intent. Whether this explanation captures historical truth or represents a kind of folk reasoning invented long after the raids ended, we cannot know with certainty, but the preference itself was real, and it shaped Hogmanay customs across the country. Women, on the other hand, were considered unlucky as first footers in most regions. The reasons given varied from place to place. Some folklorists have wondered whether this taboo connected to older beliefs about the Clavie, the ancient hag figure of winter who brought frost and storm. Others have suggested more pragmatic origins, rooted in household roles and expectations. Whatever the source, the superstition was widely held, though not universal. In some areas, particularly among close family, the rule was relaxed, and a young, cheerful woman could first foot without bringing ill fortune. The first footer did not arrive empty-handed. He brought gifts, each one symbolic, each one a wish for the household's prosperity, a lump of coal to ensure the fire would never go out and the home would stay warm, a piece of shortbread or black bun to ensure there would always be food, salt for flavour and preservation, whiskey for good cheer and hospitality, and sometimes a silver coin for wealth. These gifts were presented at the door with a traditional greeting, often in Gaelic, wishing the household health and happiness in the year to come. The first footer was then invited inside, given food and drink, and welcomed with warmth and laughter. In return, the household would offer their own gifts to the first footer, more food, more whiskey, sometimes a small token to carry away. The exchange was reciprocal, a symbol of the bond between households. The idea that generosity given would be generosity returned. In many communities, first footing was a collective activity. Groups of young men would move from house to house throughout the night and into the early hours of the morning, first footing each household in turn. This could go on until dawn, and even into the afternoon of New Year's Day. By the end of it, everyone was exhausted, full of food, more than a little drunk, and glowing with the warmth of community. But first footing was not only about luck, it was about connection, about maintaining the ties that bound people together in a world where survival often depended on cooperation. A household that was first-footed knew it was valued, knew it was part of the community, knew that if hard times came, there would be neighbours ready to help. And conversely, a household that was not first-footed, that was left alone as the night wore on, and no one came to the door, knew itself to be isolated, perhaps disliked, perhaps mistrusted. The absence of a first-footer was a kind of social death, a sign that the bonds of community had frayed. So people took first footing seriously. They prepared for it, they anticipated it, they opened their doors wide, no matter how cold the night, and they welcomed whoever came, because to turn away a first footer was to turn away luck itself. There is a story, old and often told, of a household that turned away a first footer one Hogmanay night. They were wealthy, proud, and they did not like the look of the man who came to their door. Perhaps he was poorly dressed, perhaps he smelled of the sea, perhaps he simply did not meet their standards. Whatever the reason, they closed the door in his face and told him to move on. The man left without a word, but the household's luck left with him. Over the course of the year, everything went wrong. The harvest failed, the cattle sickened, the children fell ill, and by the time the next Hogmanay came around, the household was ruined, their pride reduced to ashes. It is only a story, of course, a cautionary tale, but like all such tales, it carries a kernel of truth. Hospitality matters, generosity matters, the way you treat strangers matters, and the threshold of your home, that liminal space between inside and outside, between safety and danger, between the known and the unknown, is a place where the world is made and remade, where luck is won or lost, where the future is shaped by the choices of the present. First footing, at its heart, was a ritual of welcome, a way of saying, this house is open, this hearth is warm. You are not a stranger here. Come in, sit down, share what we have, because in the end, we are all travellers through the darkness, and the light we find is the light we make for one another. Food has always been central to Hogmanay, in a land where winters were long and harsh, where hunger was a real and constant threat. A well-stocked table at the turn of the year was both a celebration and a reassurance. It said, we have enough, we have survived, we will continue. The foods of Hogmanay were rich, substantial, built to last. They were the kinds of dishes that filled the belly and warmed the bones, the kinds of dishes that could be shared with neighbours and first footers, and still leave plenty for the household. Black bun was perhaps the most iconic of all Hogmanay foods. Do not let the name mislead you. This was not a bun in the English sense, soft and airy and meant for breakfast. Black bun was a dense, dark fruitcake, packed with raisins, currants, almonds, citrus peel and spices. It was sweetened with treacle and brandy, and the whole thing was encased in a thick layer of pastry. The result was a cake that looked at first glance like a savoury pie, but one bite revealed the rich, spiced sweetness inside. Black bun was made weeks in advance, often in early December, and left to mature. By Hogmanay, it had deepened in flavour, the fruit soaked in spirits, the spices blended and mellow. It was traditionally served in thick slices, often accompanied by a dram of whisky, and it was a gift that first footers brought to the households they visited. To offer black bun was to offer abundance, to share in the richness of the season. Then there was shortbread, golden, buttery, crumbly shortbread, made with just 3 ingredients: butter, sugar, and flour. It sounds simple, and in a way it is, but the simplicity is deceptive. Good shortbread requires skill. The butter must be the finest quality. The sugar must be just the right texture, fine but not powdery. And the flour must be handled gently, kneaded just enough to bring it together, but not so much that it toughens. The result, when done well, is a biscuit that melts on the tongue, rich and sweet and utterly satisfying. Shortbread was made in large batches at Hogmanay, shaped into rounds or rectangles, pricked with a fork, and baked until pale golden. It was served to guests, given as gifts, and eaten with tea or whisky throughout the holiday. On New Year's Day itself, the meal that came to dominate Scottish tables was steak pie. The timing of this tradition is somewhat unclear. Some sources suggest it was well established by the mid-19th century, while others connect its rise to the interwar years of the 20th century, when butchers began selling pre-made pies specifically for Hogmanay. What seems certain is that by the time January 1st became a public holiday in Scotland in 1871, steak pie had already claimed its place as the meal of choice for New Year's Day. Steak pie is exactly what it sounds like: tender chunks of beef, slow cooked in a rich gravy, encased in a golden puff pastry crust. The filling is savoury, hearty, flavoured with onions, Worcestershire sauce, sometimes a touch of mustard. The pastry is flaky and buttery, a perfect contrast to the rich meat inside. The appeal is clear. The pie could be prepared in advance and baked on the day itself, perfect for households where both rest and celebration were needed after Hogmanay's long night. Many families collected their pies from the local butcher on the 30th or 31st of December, and by the 20th century, queuing at the butcher's shop had become part of the ritual itself. The pie was usually served with mashed potatoes and peas, and it was a meal designed to soak up the excess of the night before. Rich, filling, comforting, a way of anchoring the day, of providing sustenance before the revelry began again. Whisky, of course, flowed freely at Hogmanay, Scotland's national drink, Ishkabea, the water of life. Every household kept a bottle, and it was offered to every visitor, every first footer, every friend who came through the door. To refuse whisky at Hogmanay was unthinkable. It was not simply a drink. It was a symbol of hospitality, of warmth, of shared humanity. A dram was poured, raised in a toast, and drunk with good wishes for the year ahead, and then another, and another, until the bottle was empty and a new one was opened, because to run out of whisky at Hogmanay was almost as bad as letting the fire go out. But Hogmanay food was not only about what was eaten in the home, it was also about what was shared, what was given, what was carried from house to house as an offering and a blessing. Children in some parts of Scotland went guising in Hogmanay, much as they do at Halloween in other parts of the world. They dressed in costumes or wore their parents' old clothes and went door to door singing songs, reciting poems, or performing little skits in exchange for treats. These treats were usually food: oat cakes, apples, nuts, pieces of black bun or shortbread. The children carried sacks to hold their haul, and by the end of the night they would return home laden with the generosity of their neighbours. This was not begging. It was part of the tradition, a way of including the young in the celebration, a way of teaching them the values of community and reciprocity. You gave because you had been given to. You shared because sharing was how the community survived. And at the heart of all Hogmanay food, beneath the richness and the warmth and the generosity, was a simple truth. Food is life. To share food is to share life. And at the turning of the year, when the past was uncertain and the future unknown, sharing life with one another was the most powerful magic of all. The turn of the year was a liminal time, a threshold, a moment when the ordinary rules of the world seemed to loosen, when the veil between what was and what would be grew thin. And in that thin place, it was possible to see, to know, to glimpse, if only for a moment, the shape of the future. Divination at Hogmanay was common, not the grand divination of fortune tellers and crystal balls, but the quiet, domestic divination of ordinary people trying to read the signs. The ashes of the hearth fire, as mentioned earlier, were one such sign. In some households, after the old fire was cleared away on Hogmanay, the ashes were smoothed flat in the hearth. In the morning, the family would gather to examine the patterns left in the ash. The practice is documented in 19th century folklore collections, though how widespread it truly was remains uncertain. Footprints were looked for and their direction interpreted. If the prints pointed toward the door, it was taken to mean someone would leave the household in the year ahead, perhaps through marriage, perhaps through death. If the prints pointed inward, It meant someone new would arrive, a birth or a new member joining the family. Sometimes letters or shapes would form in the ash, and these too were read for meaning. A cross might mean illness. A circle might mean wholeness and protection. The skill lay not in what you saw, but in how you read it, how you connected the shapes to the lives and anxieties of those around you. Candles, too, were watched closely. A candle that burned bright and steady was a good omen, a sign of health and prosperity. But a candle that sputtered and smoked, or worse, went out unexpectedly, was a sign of trouble ahead. And if the wax dripped in a certain way, forming shapes or patterns, those too were read for meaning. The first person you met on New Year's Day, outside of your household, carried significance. If the first person you saw was someone you liked and respected, the year would be good. If the first person was someone you disliked or mistrusted, the year would be difficult. And so, people sometimes planned their routes carefully on New Year's morning, choosing paths where they were likely to encounter friends rather than foes. The weather on Hogmanay and New Year's Day was also closely observed. A clear sky meant a good year ahead. Clouds and rain meant trouble. Snow, oddly, was considered lucky, a sign of purity and a fresh start. Wind, especially from the west, was ominous. The west was the direction of the dead, the direction of the other world, and a west wind on Hogmanay carried the breath of spirits. Animals too were watched. A crowing rooster at midnight was a good sign, a herald of the new day. A howling dog, on the other hand, was a warning of death to come. Cattle that refused to leave the barn, or sheep that huddled together in the corners of the field, foretold storms and hardship. Dreams on Hogmanay night were particularly significant. It was believed that whatever you dreamed on this night would come true in some form during the year ahead. And so, people tried to dream of pleasant things, of loved ones, of abundance. Some even placed charms under their pillows, hoping to influence their dreams. A sprig of rosemary for remembrance, a piece of wedding cake for marriage, a silver coin for wealth. These practices may seem quaint to modern eyes, superstitious, naive, but they served a purpose. They gave people a sense of control, however small, over the unknown future. They provided a framework for hope and fear, a way of making sense of the randomness of life. And they were, in their own way, acts of faith, faith that the future could be known, faith that patterns existed, even in chaos, faith that the world was not simply a series of random events, but a story unfolding, a story in which each person had a role to play. At Hogmanay, the Scots stood at the threshold of the unknown and tried to peer across. They read ashes and candles and dreams. They watched the weather and the animals and the first faces they saw on New Year's morning. And in doing so, They reminded themselves that the future, though uncertain, was not entirely beyond their reach. As midnight approached, as the final moments of the old year ticked away, there was a song that has become so familiar, so universal, that it is easy to forget it is Scottish, that it began here, in these hills and glens, before it spread across the world. Auld Lang Syne. The words are in Scots, not English, though they are close enough that most English speakers can follow the meaning. Auld Lang Syne translates roughly as old long since, or days gone by, or perhaps most poetically, for old time's sake. The song asks a question. Should old acquaintance be forgot? Should the people we have known, the friendships we have made, the memories we have shared, should all of that simply fade away, disappear into the past without a trace? And the answer, implicit in the very act of singing the song, is no. No, we will not forget. We will remember. We will raise a cup of kindness yet, for old time's sake. The melody is old, possibly dating back centuries, a folk tune that circulated in Scotland long before anyone thought to write it down. But the words, at least in their current form, come from Robert Burns, Scotland's most beloved poet. Burns wrote Auld Lang Syne in 1788, or rather, he wrote it down, for Burns himself claimed that he had heard the song sung by an old man, and that he had simply transcribed it, perhaps polishing it a bit, but preserving the essence of what he heard. It was first published in 1796, the year Burns died, as part of a collection of Scottish songs, but it did not become famous immediately. It took decades for Auld Lang Syne to spread, first throughout Scotland, then to England, and eventually to the rest of the world. By the 19th century, it had become the song of Hogmanay. When the clock struck midnight, when the old year gave way to the new, people gathered in circles, joined hands and sang. The ritual was specific. Everyone stood in a circle as the final verse began. And there's a hand, my trusty friend. They crossed their arms over their chest, each person grasping the hand of the person on their left with their right hand, and the hand of the person on their right with their left hand. This formed a chain, a circle of linked arms, and as the song reached its climax, the circle would contract, everyone moving toward the centre, drawing together, united. It was and is a powerful moment, a moment of connection, a moment of shared humanity, and it has resonated across cultures and centuries. In the 12th century, a Canadian bandleader named Guy Lombardo played Auld Lang Syne at midnight on New Year's Eve as part of a radio broadcast. The broadcast became a tradition, and through it, the song spread across North America. Soon, people all over the English-speaking world were singing Auld Lang Syne at midnight whether they understood the Scots words or not, but the song's meaning is deeper than its use as a New Year's anthem. At its heart, Auld Lang Syne is a song about memory and mortality. It acknowledges that time passes, that friendships fade, that people drift apart, but it insists that those connections still matter, that the past is not dead, but lives on in the hearts of those who remember. We too have run about the hills, the song says, and pulled the daisies fine, but we've wandered many a weary foot since old times. There is melancholy in those words, a recognition that life moves on, that the innocence of youth gives way to the burdens of age, but seas between us broad have roared since old times. Distance, separation, loss, and yet the song ends not in sorrow, but in a toast. And there's a hand, my trusty friend, and give me a hand of yours, and we'll take a right good drink for old time's sake. It is a song of resilience, of refusal to let go, of the determination to honour what has been, even as we step forward into what will be. At Hogmanay, when the Scots sang Auld Lang Syne, they were not simply singing a song, they were performing an act of remembrance. They were saying, we have survived another year, we have lost people, we have endured hardship, but we are still here, together, and that is something worth celebrating. The song became a thread that connected generations. Grandparents who had sung it as children sang it with their grandchildren. Emigrants who had left Scotland for distant lands sang it in their new homes, remembering the land they had left behind. Soldiers sang it in the trenches and on battlefields, holding on to the hope of home. And today the song endures. It has been translated into dozens of languages. It is sung at graduations, at funerals, at the closing of conferences and the endings of festivals. It has become the universal song of endings and beginnings, of farewell and hope. But it began here, in Scotland, at Hogmanay, as a way of saying, we will not forget. We will take a cup of kindness yet, for old time's sake. Scotland is not one place, it is many places. The Highlands, rugged and wild, the lowlands, gentler and more fertile, the islands, scattered like jewels in the northern sea, and each region, each community, each village had its own way of marking Hogmanay. In the Highlands, where Gaelic was still spoken, the old songs were sung in the old language. The traditions there often felt older, more connected to the deep past. In some Highland villages, boys would dress in the hides of cattle and run through the streets, being struck with sticks. This was believed to drive out evil spirits, to cleanse the village for the new year. It was noisy, chaotic ritual, one that felt like a glimpse into pagan times. In the Western Isles, on Lewis and Harris, groups of young men would form into bands on Hogmanay night. The leader of each band wore a sheepskin, and the others carried sacks. They went from house to house, chanting a Gaelic rhyme, and at each house they were given bannocks, small oatcakes, which they collected in their sacks. This was called guising, and it was both a game and a way of redistributing resources, ensuring that even the poorest households had something to celebrate with. In the Orkney and Shetland Islands, where the Norse influence remained strong, Hogmanay blended with Yule traditions. In Shetland, the festival of Uphellia, held in late January, involves the burning of a Viking longship and torchlight procession. While not strictly Hogmanay, it carries the same themes of fire, community, and the turning of the year. In the lowlands, particularly in the cities of Edinburgh and Glasgow, Hogmanay became a more public affair. Street parties, concerts, fireworks, the Edinburgh Hogmanay Festival, which began in the late 20th century, has become one of the largest New Year celebrations in the world, drawing hundreds of thousands of people to the city for a multi-day festival of music, fire, and revelry. But even in the cities, the old traditions persisted. First footing continued, black bun was still baked, and at midnight people still sang Auld Lang Syne, their voices rising above the noise of the crowds, carrying the old song into the new year. In rural areas, the pace was slower, the celebrations more intimate. Families gathered, neighbours visited. The night was spent by the fire, telling stories, sharing food, waiting for the dawn. And when the first light touched the hills, people stepped outside to greet the new year, breathing in the cold air, feeling the stillness of the world, knowing that they had passed through the darkness and emerged on the other side. Each region, each community, shaped Hogmanay to fit its own needs and its own character. But beneath the variations, the core remained the same: fire, food, hospitality, remembrance, hope. Hogmanay was, and is, a reflection of Scotland itself, diverse, resilient, bound by tradition, yet always adapting, always changing, always finding new ways to celebrate the old truths. The fire has burned low now. The candle on the table flickers, casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, the night is deep and still. The old year is almost gone. The new year waits just beyond the threshold. We have travelled far tonight, you and I, from the origins of Hogmanay, tangled in Norse and Gaelic and French, to the blazing fires of Stonehaven and Burghead, from the careful work of readying the house, to the hopeful ritual of first footing, from the rich foods and generous gifts to the quiet divinations, from the singing of Auld Lang Syne to the diverse celebrations across Scotland's regions. We have seen how the Scots greeted the new year, not with fear, but with fire, not with isolation, but with community, not with forgetting, but with remembrance. Hogmanay, at its heart, is about thresholds, the thresholds between one year and the next, the threshold between darkness and light, the threshold between what was and what will be. And it teaches us that thresholds are not to be feared, but to be honoured, that endings and beginnings are two sides of the same coin, that the door we close behind us is the same door we open ahead. As you lie here tonight, as sleep begins to take you, think of those who came before, the generations of Scots who stood in the cold on Hogmanay night, watching the fires burn, waiting for the first footer to arrive, singing the old songs, keeping the old ways alive. They are gone now. The fires they lit have long since turned to ash. The doors they opened have closed, but the traditions endure. The songs are still sung, the customs are still kept. And that, perhaps, is the true magic of Hogmanay, not in the divinations or the omens, not in the superstitions about first footers, but in the simple, stubborn determination to carry the light forward, to pass the fire from hand to hand, from generation to generation, so that no matter how dark the night, there is always warmth, always hope, always the promise of a new beginning. So rest now. Let the old year fade. Let the new year come. And when you wake, step across the threshold with courage and with joy. Happy New Year. Or as we say in Scotland, Lang me your lumreek. And if you enjoyed this journey into Scotland's past, if these old stories brought you comfort or wonder, consider sharing them. Subscribe to the channel. Let the tales of Hogmanay accompany you through your own turning of the year. Good night from the fireside. Good night from Scotland. Good night.